Welcome to the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, the Week in Sports Cars, presented this week by me, and I'm Graham Goodwin, and him, and it's Stephen Kilbey, with Marshall Pruitt unable to join us this weekend. He is en route to Road America for the Emerson WeatherTech Sports Car Championship weekend, but Marshall will be back with us next week. Before we get into the action, here's our sponsors.
Time to say a big thank you to our show partners on the Marshall Pruitt Podcast, starting with Pfaff Technologies, build-to-print composites manufacturing company. They're specializing in medium to large-scale automotive, motorsports, and military applications. Visit PfaffTechnologies.com. It's P-F-A-F-F Technologies.com to learn more about their services and how they can benefit your business. Next, it's the Justice Brothers, makers of premium additives, lubricants, and cleaners, been servicing the automotive and motorsports industries for more than 85 years, with victories in all of the biggest North American motor races, including the Indianapolis 500, the 24 Hours of Daytona. The Justice Brothers products are truly race-proven. Learn about their vast history and range of offerings at justicebrothers.com. If you're fond of awesome motor racing collectibles, including Pfaff Motorsports McLaren gear and goodies, pay a visit to torontomotorsports.com. And finally, we have a new online merchandise home for the podcast, thepruittstore.com, for all the show stickers, models, the racing memorabilia I'm trying to sell and put towards our fund to buy a house is now live and rocking. thepruittstore.com.
Well, Stephen, it's great to be back with the Week in Sports Cars. It's great to have you back, much as I'm trying to make you believe that. And what another thing that's back this week is we're back to some listener Q&A, which is a massive plus. It's the modus operandi, it's the USP, it's the lifeblood, it's the DNA, it's all those good things, the Week in Sports Cars. But one of our fabulous listeners brought up for us this week. My guess is there's a cornucopia of good things.
Yeah, a smorgasbord of questions.
Oh, we've had too much coffee. It's to give you. We are just recording this in the UK, of course, just as the Road America IMSA weekend gets underway. We asked for questions a week ago. There'd been one or two logistical niggles that had got in the way of us recording this earlier this week. So one or two of the areas of questioning will be familiar, maybe from the news some days ago, but no less valid to actually add a little bit more depth, and we hope we can do that to most, if not all, of the issues that are going to be raised in the show. I think about an hour or so for this.
Yeah, so two then.
So two. It's a Marshall Pruitt hour. So, we'll be with you till next Tuesday. Lots of news, though, still to come, most of which we can't tell you about yet. Some of which we do know when it's going to happen, some of which we don't. But fair to say that we've almost got as much going on in terms of what's happening in the future as we've got in terms of what's happening now.
Yeah, it's not quite summer break, is it, Graham?
It's not a quiet break. A break? What on earth are you talking about? What is this break of which you talk? Loads going on a whole range of fronts. Some news we'll be able to bring to you soon. Some news I hope to be able to bring to you little after that. And beyond that, some real excitement to come. If you think you know what's going on up there, well, if you do, this is a surprise to us because we're sitting on plenty. We'll crack on through it, and I think the way we're going to play this one is you're going to chuck out the questions for discussion, and I'm going to tell you whether or not I want you to answer them or not.
So, like normal then?
Yeah, much the same.
So, no format change there.
No format change. It's basically, effectively, it's the podcast version of Type Faster.
Yes, fantastic. Let's start, shall we, with Toyota and hydrogen. We've had a handful of questions about that, and this follows some conversations that Toyota had with the media at Brazil about their future in the sport and the shape of the regulations to come. Mark Whiteleg starts us off. He says, suppose the big talking point this week is hydrogen. With Toyota now fully going down that route, will more follow? BMW, I know, was keen on hydrogen, but kudos to Toyota for being the first one to go, yep, let's go. It's an exciting future ahead.
Well, you had the conversation with Toyota. We'll come to that in a moment. There's been a lot of manufacturers involved over time with the working groups on technology that was widened more recently to do with hydrogen combustion as well as hydrogen fuel cell. I think it's a smart move. Why restrict the options of technology? Will more come? Well, first and foremost, just fill in for the listener about exactly what Toyota did tell you.
Yeah, so this was kind of in the wake of the announcement at Le Mans that the hydrogen rules have been delayed by a year. So after a series of delays, I think we're getting traction. We're getting a little bit of progress on these regulations, but they're still a bit of a ways off, just in terms of the shape of them and the technology being there. And Toyota basically came out and said the way it's looking is that in year one, the thought at the moment is that there'll be just a few races for those cars, select races during the WEC season.
3 races, I think.
Yep, so Le Mans would be obviously the main headline, and that would match the timeline that the ASIO has always had, which is trying to get hydrogen cars racing at Le Mans before 2030, plus Spa, plus possibly Fuji, and I'm guessing that's in part going to be led by Toyota wanting to show that car off in their home market.
Which makes
and
perfect sense.
They are, at the moment at least, the most vocal of the potential manufacturers that are kind of declaring their interest for this. So they announced. It wasn't really a formal announcement. It's more like just a riffing of ideas. But they feel like the way it's going at the moment, unless there's any major changes, the timeline would mean that they won't bring a new car to replace the GR010 before the hydrogen regulations come in. Instead, there'll be like a transition where they'd run both the hydrogen car and the GR010 at the same time. So run the GR010 for the entire season, and then the hydrogen car for these select races. So effectively doing a dual program, but the capacity of what they've got in terms of building and designing and manufacturing cars in Cologne for racing is such that it doesn't make sense for them to develop 2 cars at the same time. So we're going to see updates coming for the GR010 using up the jokers that they'll be permitted through. I think it's the end of 2029, isn't it? That you can get before the regulations then change for hypercar, and then we'll see a hydrogen car developed alongside of that from Fresh.
So to be clear, no confirmation yet of the numbers of cars. So we don't know. You can guarantee there's going to be at least one full season GR010. What we don't know is whether or not it is a second car being replaced by a hydrogen car for 3 races, or the hydrogen car being a third car. We don't know.
And I think they probably don't either, because we're not that close to it yet. Because there is going to be that period where you could potentially, if it runs to the timeline that the ASIO has stated, which is introducing these cars in 2028, then there is going to be a period where you'll have both hydrogen cars and the current rule set, which has just been extended through 2029, racing at the same time. And there's just so many questions that they can't answer yet because they're not there with these regulations. It's about pace, pit stops. Are they all going to be put in the hypercar class to compete against them? Are they going to be racing separately? Will they be racing for the overall? What are the target lap times? What types of hydrogen technology will be permitted? What won't? It's still early days.
So on the subject of early days, in terms of who else might be interested, well, you mentioned BMW. Hyundai, we know, were interested at one point in this area. They're still very much a prospect to come into hypercar and GTP, so potential for them to effectively have a similar kind of arrangement as Toyota if there's still interest there. Amongst the other manufacturers that were in that hydrogen village at Le Mans were Lotus, Geely from China. No indication from them at all that there's immediate interest in going racing with hydrogen. There's lots of other, you might call kind of more industry bodies. Ligier there, I think, with Bosch.
Yeah, Ligier with Bosch again, yeah.
And then it was Solution F with Celine.
Yep,
with what was not the world's most attractive looking car.
It didn't look, yeah.
Yeah, it was. You'll have to help me with which way you swipe these days, but that's way after my time.
And mine as well, Graham. Come on, I'm not that old. Also young. Jesus.
But the other manufacturer that played a prominent role in that exhibition of hydrogen technology at Le Mans, Alpine, with the Alpenglow concept, which was a spectacular looking roadworthy.
It's a concept, isn't it?
It's a concept, spectacular looking thing. That is our hydrogen combustion concept, and again, we believe that likely to be embraced by any new regulations, if indeed there is a manufacturer prepared to stand up and say that's what they want to do, because that is the Toyota is a hydrogen combustion engine. It's not a fuel cell car, I don't believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So there's an awful lot of hashtag wait and see. Choose your weapons here. When you look at the kind of critique that comes the way of sports car racing at the moment, it's often around, isn't everything getting a bit spec? Look at, whether it's, single chassis, single, hydrogen, single hybrid supply chain for the LMDH cars, etc., etc. You've got to embrace the fact they're trying to do something different. This is the point at which you're trying to accommodate the fact that there is a challenger technology coming through that at the moment is not proven to anywhere near the performance level required to compete at and indeed finish and compete for the win at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But I think anybody who loves that aspect, that kind of R&D technology aspect of what sports car racing has been for its entire history, has to get behind this as being, an exciting moment to see what is possible.
And yeah, we're going to see what this era does, aren't we, when we get out of the current hypercar regulations into the next. And just, like I said, there's so many questions. We just don't know what this is going to look like. But the key is the ACO are very much being led by manufacturers on here. They are trying as best they can to not lay down the law and say this is exactly what you're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, this is the rule set, come up, take it or leave it. They're talking to these manufacturers and they're listening to what technology they want to develop, what they see as relevant, what they see as possible for these rule sets. They've just got to put it all together. But they're listening.
Moving on from the hydrogen side, there is another area I know there's at least one question about, which was a story from about a week ago to do with a senior member of Toyota management, Rob Loipen, who was fined in the wake of Interlagos for contributing to answering questions effectively about balance of performance in the WEC, offering criticism about some of those regulations and their implementation. With a journalistic colleague, I don't know, not a face or a name that I recognise from being a regular in the WEC paddock. And the question, I think, was around why, what's that all about? The reality is...
And what impact will it have, was the question.
Well,
going forward.
It was an interesting timing to it. I think it was the following day, maybe 2 days afterwards, that we also had IKEA Toyota had finally accepted the Spirit Le Mans award from 2023, and that came in the wake of effectively snubbing that award in the wake of controversy to do with the way that they felt they'd been treated and that Ferrari had been treated for the Le Mans 24 Hours in the centenary year. Let's get into it on two fronts. I'm struggling not to believe there wasn't a conversation that involved both those things at the same time.
100%. It's got to have been.
A message, I think, being delivered to Rob, who I hold in the highest regard, by the way, to Toyota, and frankly to the whole paddock, to say there is a regulation that says we don't discuss this. We don't discuss it in the terms in which it was being discussed, because of its sensitivity, if you like, the fact that you need to ask a pretty involved question to get to the nuts and bolts of how this works. And there's limited appetite for an uninformed debate about the concept. The concept has been successful. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. Look at the level and depth we've got in the top class in hypercar, and for that matter in GTP, in IMSA racing. So its success in attracting what everybody wanted, which was high quality racing efforts, is undeniable. And what the powers that be are trying to do is to de-risk that process by trying to stop uninformed debate and conversation And for that matter, the almost inevitable moaning that comes, and trust me when I say this, dear listener, my time in motorsport reporting is pretty much identical to the introduction of BOP and GT3 and GT1 back in the day. And I can tell you without fear of any controversy whatsoever that the quality of conversation I was able to have in the wake of that in any given paddock fell like a stone, because all anybody wanted to talk about was the BOP that week. The reality was the fields became more in-depth and more stable and more varied immediately. There doesn't tend to be very much argument about the quality of racing. What I think this is all about is sending a message. It's in the regulations. We're serious about that. And if you don't respect those regulations, there are going to be consequences. I think what the rule makers have tried to do here is to reset the clock with this, to say, you've all come with your brand new shiny cars because this helps you with your cost implications, particularly with development curves, which was the massive bugbear of LMP1 hybrid, which made it almost impossible for anybody else to join the show. If you like that aspect of it, you're going to have to take the pain of a phrase that you coined a little while ago in conversation, which is managing your disappointment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. It is just a different world now, especially in the top classes with GTP and hypercar, and there is a level of adjustment still going on as to how we process results, how we process BOP changes, how they're communicated, how they're discussed. I am of two minds about the rule of
you can't discuss it.
You can't discuss it. On one hand, it's made trips down the paddock infinitely more interesting for me because you're just not constantly bombarded with every driver and team personnel member you meet just using every conversation with you to try and get through some bullet points they've got in their back pocket about how disappointed they are with the result, the BOP sheet this week. That's gone, and it means you're talking about other things. And when you're trying to work out which teams are making progress, which cars are making progress, actually it's more interesting to talk about the smaller stuff on the side rather than just, they're doing better because the BOP's better this week. And you see that with the likes of how big of a step Porsche has taken. It's not just BOP. There are other things going on that are making these key differences in what we're seeing on the result sheets on the Sunday. But on the other hand, I do understand that it is a bit, we're all grown adults. Should we really have a regulation that says there's a certain topic you can't discuss, which, for all its flaws, faults, and controversy, is a key part of the way the sport is governed. It would be like saying to footballers in the Premier League, you can't discuss the offside rule. Whatever happens, no matter how shafted you get by it, you're not allowed to discuss the offside rule. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. VAR, yeah. Well, yeah, that's probably even better of an example. They should have, they're investing time and money into it. It's their careers, and with manufacturers, it's their R&D pot that they're going into, and marketing budgets. They should be allowed to talk about what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
it's difficult.
It is. I mean,
but people can't help themselves if you don't have this rule.
Oddly enough, I responded overnight to a debate on one of the online forums that I'd missed when it happened a couple of weeks ago. We've had a lot going on the last couple of weeks, and some perfectly valid points about what you do about it on TV, about explaining and debating and noting whether or not you think it's made a difference. That classic example of someone who says, don't talk about it in depth, then talk about it in depth a reasonable amount. I just put this in front of the Weekend Sports Cars audience, which is, take as an example of how this is supposed to work the Porsche 963. Last year, those cars showed glimmers of pace, but never over a full race did they look like they were going to be ultimately successful. Transformed this year. Now look at the BOP values from any given race last year and the BOP values for that same car for this year, and tell me whether or not you think the minor differences between the two values have made that difference. The answer is it hasn't. This is still about excellence. It's still about Yes, the drivers.
Squeezing the orange of what you get.
Yes, it's about the strategy, it's about the pit crew, it's about the development engineers finding out how they can manage that package. And what that gives me is a huge amount of hope and encouragement that the other teams that aren't quite there yet have got a pathway forward now that should mean that they can close the gap. So that's what you look for, is this ripple, if you like, of those teams catching up the teams that were longer established with, better understanding their machinery. And by the way, coming back to the Toyota piece to wrap this up, it is Toyota understanding that they had got to the stage with their highly developed platform they understood, and they're going to have to accept, I'm afraid, that the competition has caught up. They dominated Interlagos. Fuji is going to be extremely interesting. We've got Kota before then, of course. But such a huge kind of history with that team and success at Fuji. That, I think, is going to be a hell of a yardstick. That's a track they can't understand more than they do. But it'll be a hell of a yardstick for where we actually are with progress to the rest.
There's one last point and question I want to cover on Toyota before we move on, and this is from Chris Hartley. Thanks to everyone else who put in questions, Steve Foll and Phil48, on this subject. Chris says, with Toyota thinking of a hydrogen-based car and keeping the existing GR 10, do you think they can keep that car at the top end of the field just with Joker upgrades, as it will be the oldest platform by some way by the time we get to hydrogen?
Well, they do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they wouldn't be running it.
Well, and the irony is that the BOP could come around and save them by that point, couldn't it?
Well, I think they will be probably as aware as anybody and more than most about where at the moment they feel at certain tracks they are lacking a little. And I think the next critical point is going to be just exactly what do they do with that car. There's not a lot you can do. They're in the performance window. It's not like you can strap on another turbo. You can't do that.
But there are strides you can take, and there is a grey area with Joker upgrades as to how far you can push the envelope when you're discussing with the rule makers. This is the change we want to make. This is why we want to do it, and outlining what difference it's going to make to your car. That Toyota did make a massive step when they used that first Joker.
Oh yeah, I mean, first year, anybody that doesn't remember, first year of hypercar, the thing looked like a bucking Bronco. Absolutely, it was not a good look for the new hypercar class to see that the way that once we've been used to the TSO 50 and the way that thing went racing, which was just seamless, crushing performance, to watch the first iteration of the GR 10 come out the stalls, it looked horrible.
Yeah, and in theory, with the way the rules work, sure, they're not able to, and they're certainly with their form, are not going to be able to argue for major performance upgrades anytime soon. But there is a lot you can do in the scope of the rule set. Look how different the Peugeot looks after its major Joker has been played. And if you look back at LMP1 times, it wasn't like the manufacturers were coming back every year with a completely new car. We had like the R18 looks like a completely different animal from its first iteration to its last. Same with the 919. It will look different by the time we see it take to the circuit for its final race. It's just the areas that they can improve it, but they're still.
It is interesting.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. Seeing because they've all got bands of engineers and designers behind the scenes who are eager to just show off what they can do, and it's just they're being funneled into certain areas like drivability and durability.
And that's another good point, because I think people come into this perhaps thinking what you're looking for with a Joker upgrade is top end performance.
No,
and it's not. It's actually about how long you can keep that car in the upper band of that performance.
Yeah,
it is them understanding
what Ferrari had done with theirs.
Yeah, in other words, what's falling off here. I don't mean physically falling off, but what in terms of performance are they finding it tricky to maintain deeper into a single or a double stint?
And which types of circuits are they stronger and weaker at? Because you can have the same values of 3 different circuits, but the car, in the way it handles those circuits, can be very different.
Look at Toyota.
Yeah.
Toyota just dominated in Brazil and always looked like dominating in Brazil. And there's been other occasions this year where they have looked, if not also runs, but to be struggling to get to decent points levels. But good stuff. Okay, what's next?
Aston Martin's Valkyrie LMH, Graham. We've had a few questions about this, Graham. Stephen Gates says, we've seen the Valkyrie out testing now. Based on looks, what are your first impressions?
I think the problem is you can't really judge it on the looks without adding in the soundtrack. And the soundtrack, I don't know what pornography is, but I imagine it must be like that.
It's just filth, isn't it? It really is.
It's what when I first heard the video, saw the video that was released by Aston Martin, it brought back two memories, both of which happened to be at Monza. And one was the final race of the Ferrari 458. It was the JMW car. And
I was there with you for that.
You were. And the other was, I think it was that same race meeting we had the Masters Historic cars. And remarkably, there were two incidents as the cars were released for free practice sessions, one of which affected the European Le Mans Series and one of which affected the Masters Historic. And as it turned out, I was doing some filming on the iconic gantry during both of those moments. And what you then experienced was something really, truly rather special. The Ferrari 458, now you look back at it, particularly the GT version, what a howling beast that thing was. And it turned out that the JMW car had cleared the incident, red flag came out just at the start of the session, and no one else went out. So there were maybe two or three cars. You could hear that car all the way round, every single gear change. Yeah. You could hear that car. And it was then the same for the Lola Aston Martin, DBR12, that was in the Masters Historic session as well. Two unique soundtracks. That V12 in the back of that is an immediate fan favourite. It could be 12 seconds off the pace and no one's going to care in the first few races. It just sounds magnificent. They have ensured
that in an era where there's turbo cars flying around everywhere, we're going to be talking about this car. Were you there that year at Le Mans when it came for the first time? Do you remember that car?
We're going to be talking about that car until the moment when it goes past. And then there's two reasons why we won't be talking about it when it goes past. The two reasons are, one, because you'll stop talking to listen, and two, there's no point in talking anyway because it's too loud.
Yeah.
So, I think it's another step for hypercar. It's an LMH car with no hybrid system, so that's another challenge for the systems of balancing here. I think it looks great. It's in a test livery at the moment. The one challenge they're going to have with the styling of that car is it has got a bit of a gaping chasm, chin level air intake that will either look great depending on what the livery is that Heart of Racing bring to it, or it might look slightly disproportionate. But we'll forgive it all.
I think it looks awesome. I actually think of all the iterations that we've seen of the Valkyrie, be it for the road or the track only spec of that car,
it looks proper.
Just
it looks
the aero
proper.
on that is just.
It looks proper.
It's ridiculous.
The rear end, it has to be said, sort of has a bit of a nod towards the Glickenhaus, which is no bad thing.
Well, and the Ferrari, I think, the 499P. It's just they've everything they've had to do in detuning the power levels from the AMR Pro, they've gained it back in just aggressive aero.
It will be a first. It'll be a first time in hypercar that a car initially designed as a road car now heads to the track. And that, again, is another part of this convergence rule set that you never know. What else might that open the door to? We've seen the Red Bull RB17, which is effectively son of Valkyrie. Will that be something they might want to race at some point? Don't know. Don't immediately think so. That's certainly not one of the ones that's on my radar, but that could be quite interesting. Who knows who else might decide to take another look at a rule set on the back of that. But I think it's a truly exciting thing.
There is a question on that front from Gustavo Bamber. He says, do you think other OEMs could follow this route in terms of producing a car for the LMH rule set without a hybrid system?
Why not?
I mean, they could, but it's going to depend on what their a lot of the time what their road car strategy is and what their production cars look like.
I think
technologically.
I think the reality is here. It's we've seen stuff like Koenigsegg and De Tomaso, and the reality is that this is, even though this is now kind of cost restricted with the new regulations, it's still a big bill. If you're only selling 4 or 5 cars, or even 200 or 300 cars, you're going to have to be absolutely certain that this is going to be something that's going to be at least cost neutral to you, if this is your marketing proposal. And you also have to take into account you've got a massive plus in that you're going head to head with supercar royalty, Aston Martin, Porsche, Lamborghini, Ferrari. But the downside is they're all damn good. And if you go out there and you're a challenger brand, let's say a De Tomaso, for instance, if you go out there and get your arse handed to you on a week-by-week basis, that is not something that's going to tick the box for somebody to take the risk and go with a challenger brand based on the performance of that car.
Damien Peachman, final question on the Valkyrie, final point. Will it be ready in time for Daytona?
Hope so.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of in-depth conversations going on at the moment. I know a lot of people are focusing on, look, the cars here. Next question, who's going to drive the cars? We've got a reasonable idea behind the scenes of a number of the names that are likely to be in the frame. We certainly know some of the people have been part of a test program that we're aware of, in prototypes, out of competition, that have been involved in that. There are some pretty well-known names from the sports car racing family in amongst that. No major international headline surprises for full season drivers. It's been made clear by Ian James that they're looking to both the Heart of Racing family and the Aston Martin family for the core of their driver squads. But you can be absolutely sure this is not a program that lacks ambition.
No.
This is not going to be something where they're just going to put a bunch of their mates in the car. They're going to want to get out there, get that car developed quickly, and start to compete.
Yeah, and I think specifically on will it be ready in time for the start of the IMSA season in 25. Last time I spoke to Ian James, and the last time I spoke to Adam Carter.
Can explain who Adam Carter is.
Adam Carter from Aston Martin's, head of Aston Martin's race programs, with the sports car side of things. It's on track. They have a timeline, the development timeline of this car. Everything's running schedule right now, and part of that development timeline is that Daytona test at the end of the year, making sure that they get to that Daytona sanction test, which I think is it November this year rather than December. They've moved it, but even so, that's part of the homologation process of the car. If they can get that done, get it in both wind tunnels, they'll be absolutely fine.
I think the other thing to say is, as always with brand new cars, starting the IMSA season with a 24-hour race is a big ask. But I think they'll see success as being there and in being in competitive form. If the car is there and is quick, that will be, I think, the first big box ticked, and they've then got time to do more testing before the rest of the season, with Sebring 2 months after.
Yeah. Let's move on to AO Racing and Sebastian Priaulx. They were in the news this past week because despite the fact that AO Racing is leading the GTD Pro Class Championship, and fantastic for them, up against such a...
Roxy this weekend.
Roxy this weekend. Up against such an awesome and deep field in GTD Pro with Corvette, Ford and the likes of those guys there. Yeah, and Pfaff as well. So Priaulx has left the driver lineup. He was in for the full season. He has departed because he's been called up for more intense programs with Multimatic in the background. So it's meant that Julian Anlauer has taken the wheel for this weekend. He's all right, isn't he, Julian?
He's fairly quick.
Yeah, he's all right.
Doesn't lack confidence by the win of the car.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure he's driven a Porsche as well.
Yeah, I think that's somewhere on his CV.
So we've got a couple of questions. First one from Daniel Roberts asking what should the expectations be ahead of Road America this weekend for the team. Well, with Julian Anlauer in the car, I think they can safely say they'll be in a chance.
AO Racing are a team that does not lack ambition, and I think
they don't do anything but half measure, do they?
Indeed, and that has been spurred on by success so far with the GTD Pro efforts. Julian will add further punch to that with experience of the platform. it's absolutely nothing to say against Seb. Seb has not left that program because of pace.
No,
left,
not at all.
He's
Nothing
left
to do with
because of program or programs as yet unannounced.
Yeah, it's all confidential at the moment from Multimatic's side. I've asked the question specifically.
Yeah.
Can we talk to him? Can we talk? Get some more detail on what he's going to be doing with Multimatic? But I think it's fair to say, if you're going to prize somebody like Seb Priaulx, who's very young, very talented, away from a championship leading car in a very big championship, it's going to be something pretty good, isn't it?
I think I've got an inkling what it is the straight honest answer. I mean, we do know, by the way, that Seb has got another programme, which is, by the way, not the programme that we're talking about here, which came out of the entry list for the next Nürburgring race.
Yeah, the NLS4, the 6-hour race this weekend. He's in a Hyundai.
Yeah, so, no, please stop.
On my walking horse.
Stop right now. No, that doesn't mean that Vulcan Horse Motorsport are going to run the hypercar program for Hyundai, none of which is announced. No. What this is Vulcan Horse have a fleet of effectively arrive and drive cars, one of which it's an i30N, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he's racing that with, I'd say, I could put it, quite talented member of his own family.
His mum?
No, it's not his mum. No, it's his dad. So Seb with Andy Priaulx and that tall bloke. The other one,
Stephen Merchant.
No, Ben Barker, and is it Aaron Connor? Can't remember the name of the Alex Connor.
Alex Connor, the
GT4 driver from Addict GT4 this year. That is all about getting.
That garage is going to be really good fun.
It's really, really good fun. But it's all about ring permits. And if you don't know about ring permits, we'll find a better moment to talk about this. This is not an indication of a program with Multimatic and Hyundai. It's not a program of Seb Priaulx going with Hyundai anywhere. If we had to be guessing, that indicates to me that we might well see a program for the Ford Mustang GT3 on the Nürburgring next year.
Yeah,
that to me is a blindingly obvious conclusion there. That's not what we're talking about here for Seb Priaulx. As I say, got an inkling of what this might be about. At the moment, the whole picture in terms of factory and factory blessed drivers and factory level drivers in both prototypes and GT cars is a pretty fast moving tale. It is going to be one hell of a silly season to come, and that silly season is sort of kicking off now. We've got questions now about Nico Müller later on. So it is a bit of a watch this space. They've not done that for no reason, and I think we're going to find out very quickly what it is that Seb Priaulx's up to.
He's got such a bright future, isn't he, ahead of him, Seb? I've known him for a long time. I remember speaking to him when he was in Ginetta Juniors, and the man was talking about gear ratios and brake temperatures, and he would have been like 14 at the time, and I just remember being just astounded by how mature he was and how much of a level head he'd got. So all credit to Andy, and Harry Tinknell has done a lot of mentoring with him as well.
Yeah.
He's going to be a star. So let's get into Cadillac for 2025. We've got a few questions about that. The first one comes from Teo Cousins, who says the Pruitt scenario, first formulated back in April, appears to be taking place as predicted, but Cadillac still hasn't announced who's going to replace Chip Ganassi Racing. Mm-hmm. Is there an obvious reason for the hold-up?
Lots of obvious reasons for the hold-up, some of which we can talk about, some of which we fundamentally can't talk about. Marshall, you're absolutely right, was all over this story from the very start. The realities here are that some of the moving pieces in this, we've been very close to this story from pretty much day one, Stephen. We've been talking to some of the main players in this story since that time, and we are working with them to help them to make the announcements that are due to come as deep and as high quality as they possibly can be. In terms of why these things haven't come forward, there's always reasons why. First reason, wouldn't be a surprise to anybody, General Motors is a very big company.
Are they?
Yeah, they are. Huge. Wow. Bigger than Glickenhaus. Bigger. Imagine that. Yes. Anyway, beyond that, big companies tend to have quite complex systems around approving programs, funding programs,
just contracts,
yes,
signing contracts,
staffing, all of those things. Process is a massive thing, and it gets bigger the bigger the company. If you want to point the finger at one likely aspect of why there's been, let's not call it delay, but a gap between the first headlines and a formal announcement, that's it. The second thing is we're just over halfway through the season on both sides of the pond here, and pretty clearly there's been some very significant races for both the WC programme and the IMSA programmes, and everybody involved wants to keep people's mind on the job in hand. And as we very well know, this is not just about the team owner, the team principal, or indeed the drivers, but there's a lot of other moving pieces, a lot of people involved in getting those cars to and from the track, making those cars go around the track, making those cars go faster around the track. And it's important that those people are kept as informed as they possibly can be about what the position is for them moving forward. It's right to be respectful of the staff involved, and it's right as well to focus on the performance of the team. Right now, Chip Ganassi Racing are contracted to run those cars
and are fighting for a championship,
and as limited distraction as possible in what are challenging circumstances, of course, is therefore welcome. So they're the reasons. You're not going to have very long to wait, is the straight and honest answer. It is another, I'm afraid, hashtag watch this space.
Just think of it like this. When you go on your holiday, Graham,
holiday,
and you turn up at the hire car desk, and to pay for a week-long rental of a Lancia for €125, it takes 2 hours to get that contract done and signed and get the keys. Imagine trying to do the same thing for a £25 million programme that involves 2 hypercars.
Yeah.
That's going to be a long time waiting at the desk.
Do you want the sat-nav?
Do you want the insurance?
Yeah. Is Aunt Davidson in the car? Do you want the booster seats?
Matt Crossland says, who do you see getting the spare Porsche 963s if Jota moves to using Cadillacs?
Right, first things first, there are no spare 963s, or the ones that have got purpose already. So even the Jota spare, the one that they have actually still got and will use to the end of the season in the number 12 car, that is actually a loaner. That's a factory loaned tub, and the car will return to its original tub at the end of the year. Let's presume that Jota decide they're not running Porsches at the end of this year. What out there do you believe happens to those cars? They're not automatically sold. They're certainly not handed over to another team. Somebody owns those cars. In the case of the 2 Jota cars, I'm pretty certain that their backers own those cars, and they are owned by either companies or private individuals.
So Tom Brady's going to take it to Walmart.
Could be.
Awesome.
Yeah, put a hatchback version of it in. Put a tow bar on it. That'd be quite fun. There's no guarantee those cars will ever race again. No guarantee at all. Those are cars, by the way, with Le Mans heritage, Le Mans finishing heritage. They are valuable cars in their own rights. So there is no guarantee that any car, whether or not it's those cars, Proton's cars, JZT Miller's cars, should that programme, for whatever reason, come to an end, will be handed over or sold. There will be, I'm sure, a debate for any car that's retired from frontline service for whatever reason. Do you want that car back in a competitor's hands? Is there, a financial debate to be had about the value of that car against the value that it has to a team that wants to race it elsewhere? Porsche have made it reasonably clear that they can supply other cars. There are other teams that have made it clear that they would quite like to have a car, but quite liking to have a car and having the means to race them are 2 entirely different questions. So first things first, when you're doing kind of fantasy WC grid or fantasy IMSA grid for next year, by all means say, here are the number of Porsche 963s that are currently racing. Don't necessarily assume that if Team A is not going to run Car A, that Car A will be handed on or sold to Team B. It might just as easily end up in somebody's prized private collection. But again, a bit of watch this space. I think we're still going to see growth in both championship grids. I'm sure there's more questions about that later, but don't assume that the Hertz team, Jota, Porsches, whether or not the team eventually tell us that they're not going to be racing them in 2025, will necessarily be up for grabs.
Nico Müller, we mentioned him briefly.
We did.
Colin Bull asks, with him moving to Porsche next year from Peugeot, does this mean there's going to be a shake-up in the Porsche Penske 963 driving squads, or will he go to privateers?
Well, first things first, there's no guarantee that Nico is actually going to Porsche for a sports car program yet. He's got some heritage in Formula E. Might he be principally Formula E, but with some endurance duties for Porsche? That's possible. There's a whole lot of don't know. It is one of the very first pieces in the jigsaw that's beginning to move. Should say, by the way, because we didn't get a chance to say this when the move first happened, utterly delighted both that Nico has found a berth with a major manufacturer, but also that's left the opportunity for Peugeot to promote Malte Jacobsen. Listeners to this show will be in no doubt of the regard with which we hold the sickeningly talented young Dane.
Bang average, isn't he?
Bang average. And if only he could deal with his challenging personality, just the lack of respect that he shows to his elders. Of course he doesn't. He's a picture of charm and professionalism. So that is good news. It's another new part to this exciting era, is a new young talent finding a berth in a team that really needs that punch right now.
Yeah, and then when it comes to Porsche, yeah, we are hearing that there's going to be moves made with their Hypercar and GTP driver alliance. We just don't know where it's going to fall yet. There is so much more to come. There are entire manufacturers that only have like one or two drivers contracted through next year that we know about. So there could be some massive seismic changes.
Yep.
Not just in teams race and who they're racing with.
We've got no need to talk about balance of performance, have we? There's so much more to do.
Yeah, brilliant.
You're going to be typing faster.
Great. Can't wait. Brandon Kratzer asks about Hyundai and Genesis and potential for hypercar and GTP programs. Says, is there anything new on the IMSA and WEC programs for Hyundai and Genesis? And Gustavo Bamba says, if they manage to have a Pipo engine, will they have a proven engine for a good start? And is 2026 too soon? Surely the green light must be very soon if that's the case.
Okay, right. So
where are we?
What are we looking at? We're looking at Hyundai being one of the more likely sign-ups for hypercar/GTP. We're waiting to see exactly what, if anything, happens and when. Indication is that there is hunger there. Indication is that we will hear something, I think, reasonably soon. And whether or not that's good news or bad news, we'll hashtag wait and see. Let me deal with the Pipo engine thing first. If they are going for a Pipo engine, for those that don't know who Pipo Moteur are, I'll explain. Principally, their background has been in rally and rallycross engines, so turbocharged motors. In sports car racing, of course, the Glickenhaus had a turbo V8, which was effectively a melding of two four-cylinder turbocharged engines. Even if they do go to Pipo, and Hyundai in their WRC efforts have had history with Pipo, so why wouldn't they? Don't assume it's the same engine. Okay, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, in very many reasons, there's a good reason why it may not be. So, Hyundai are a massive concern. They've got a lot of resource and a lot of hunger and ambition, and whatever they announce, I think it's going to be exciting. I think it's a brand that we've not seen ever at the top end of sports car racing, or frankly, in any major motorsport with the exception of WRC. And its arrival with a program in any form of circuit racing, I think, will be watched very carefully by the established order, and even more excitingly, by some of the other challenging brands in the Southeast Asian marketplace. Because if Hyundai break through, well, okay, Kia are a sister brand, But there's another huge marketplace in Southeast Asia for road cars who are now beginning to diversify into Halo sub-brands, etc. in China. And if the Chinese marketplace gets behind circuit racing and sees that as a plus, boy oh boy, I think you're going to start to see some fireworks.
Mason Covey asked specifically about GTP for 2025. He says, it might be a little bit early, but do you guys have a rough guesstimate of what the GTP field will look like for the Rolex 24 next year?
I think the answer is all indications suggest, as long as things go down the road we expect them to, and we're not going to give you any specifics at this point, is a little growth. Okay, they're not going to go from just into double figures to, figures starting with a 2, but I think we will see a bigger GTP field at Daytona than we saw this year, but by a handful of cars. There may well be other things to come out of the wash in the latter part of this season. What I would say for the moment is it's pretty clear to me that the majority of manufacturers competing in WEC are very focused on their WEC programs, and the majority of them have got work to do to get those cars up to speed. I don't expect to see any major surprises with manufacturers announcing they'll come and do Daytona that aren't currently slated to be part of the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. There is of course the potential, as we just dealt with, for there to be an evolving marketplace for privateer cars, and if there's going to be growth in privateer cars, the most likely place for that to happen is IMSA, because there's not looking like there's space in WEC for next season. So that's the area I think that is going to provide any numerical growth beyond those programs we're already aware of.
Yeah. I spoke to John Doonan very recently, and there's a piece coming out
soon.
Did he say, which I'm sure.
I've told you not to call?
Yeah, he did.
You again.
But after he said that...
Yeah, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, for God's sake.
After he said that... and this will come out in the feature that you'll all be reading, I'm sure, on Racer and Daily Sports Car in the next week or two, is for Rolex 24 next year, the demand for entries is so high throughout the classes. He said they would need to expand the pit boxes by 20 to fit all the additional cars in.
Wow.
That's the quote. They'd need 20 new pit boxes to fit everyone in who wants to come.
Remember, that's not just GTP. That's across, GTP.
That's the other thing to weigh up. Is it
GT Pro and LMP2?
Do you bring in the likes of an extra GTP car for a one-off when you've got a team sitting there that wants to do a full season in GTD
no, you
or
don't.
something? It's very difficult.
Well, we've seen that previously, haven't we? We saw GTD Pro cars turned away because they were focusing on an order of precedence that basically started with: are you a full season entrant for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship? Yes, you're in. Are you a full season entrant for the Endurance Cup? That's tier 2. Are you neither of the above, but have got a history of supporting the package? In other words, are you regular entrants into one or other or more of our support series and want to do a limited program endurance? That's tier 3. Are you just wanting to do the Rolex 24 Hours? That's tier 4. And I think that's right. That's smart. It's no different to what's actually happened with the selection of most of the teams for the FI World Endurance Championship this year.
Do love John Doonan. Such a tease, isn't he? He's fantastic. Esteban Garcia Press asks about Nico Veroni.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about his future in sports car racing? Is he being considered for hypercar and GTP?
I'd be surprised if there weren't people with his name on a list somewhere. First things first, he's very rapid. He's another guy like Milton Jakobsen we mentioned before.
Dry, dull, boring, rude.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Exciting to watch. Great pace, engaging personality, excitable in a really fun way, and clearly is a big plus for any team that uses his talents. Massively unlucky with the way that his full season drive in GTD went south with the second Corvette from AWA withdrawn. He's picked up since then a couple of other drives, including a full season drive in the European Le Mans series. He's definitely one of those guys that a lot of people have got on a list to talk to evaluate, to watch. And I think the next year or so for him is going to be career defining. We've already seen Marshall's piece, if you're reading Racer, and if you're not, you should be, about the prospect of him with an IndyCar shot. So
he has wanted to do that for a long time. I remember him speaking about his desire to join the IndyCar scene when we first met him.
Yeah,
he's very keen on single seaters. So and if he's rapid enough, that's sort of paddock where you can get a drive, isn't it?
There you go. And that's not to say that we wouldn't see him in the future as a already seasoned and championship winning endurance racer, as somebody who pops in and out for the odd 2 or 3 races in the way that other IndyCar drivers do. I wish him well. He's a super kid. He's always a pleasure to see. It's never boring when you're talking to Nico Veroni, and he has that fantastic blend of massive enthusiasm, respect for his surroundings. He's the opposite of arrogant. He's kind of very mild. Needs to be sort of gently built up to the fact that, go on, you're awesome, son. Oh no, but no, yeah, you are. Yeah, but he has got that self-deprecating outlook that I think is very healthy in a young professional sportsman. He knows he's good. He performs well. He sort of doesn't like hearing it.
Ethan Killian says, with a relatively new corporate head at Audi and the latest shake-up in their F1 management, do you see Dollner potentially working to rediversify Audi's motorsport program somewhere in the near future?
It's a simple answer, I'm afraid, Ethan, and the answer is there's no signs whatsoever of it. That's the saddest answer I'm going to be giving in this edition of the Week in Sports Cars. The answer is, I'm really sorry, but we've seen no sign of divergence from their chosen path, which is sort of put the customer racing side on, I'm not going to say life support, that's not fair, but certainly no new cars being built, etc., etc. No, I think it's as simple as that.
Next topic. This is one for you, Graham, because you have a history in your lengthy, perhaps too long career.
Massively too long.
In crisis communications. This is a
CrowdStrike
question. Just asking about what went on and the fact that we're not going to see the Orica racing Road America this weekend. I think they pulled out of a GT event as well with the Mercedes. Right thing to do, isn't it, for George Kurtz and his band?
Look, you've got to feel for any company that finds itself in that position. Nobody, we're not aware. He did this on purpose, but from every public explanation, this would appear to be an error. I'm not a computer engineer. I know nothing about code. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of it. But in terms of the optics of it, it is, of course, correct that George steps away while that crisis was happening and while that crisis is raw.
You can't be seen to go racing.
You can't, but not when you're supposed to be on the other end of the phone explaining yourself to people at governmental level.
Yeah,
that's a poor optic. He's made a smart choice there. What do I hope? I hope that there's no lasting damage, not just to CrowdStrike, but to anybody else's business on the back of what was clearly a major event. And I hope that George finds his way back into the cockpit, because two things. One is, he's a very valid part of the paddocks with which he's involved. And two, make no mistake, his efforts support the businesses and careers of people that I care about. And that's the same with every Pro-Am motorsport programme. So for all the right reasons, I hope they get it sorted. I hope they've got absolutely to the bottom of it. I hope anybody who's suffered damage as a result of the incident does not suffer lasting damage, and I'm confident that that will be the case. And I hope we find our way back to normality. I mean, look, you can say there, but for the grace of God, go I. I'm not the owner of a global company dealing with cybersecurity. There is an irony here that it wasn't a security failing. It was, by the sound of it, a coding problem. There are some pretty serious questions that George will need to ask of himself, his business, and of the employees of that business. And I've zero doubt that has been done and done very quickly, and in some cases very loudly. Are there going to be ripples from this? 100% there are. I sincerely hope that some of those ripples don't involve us not seeing the CrowdStrike name in motorsport.
More on to some general questions now. We're going to start with Apex Dream Cars, who's going to the WEC race at COTA alongside Le Mans.
Yep.
So this will be his first event at COTA and his first WEC race. He's bought a paddock pass, and he's asking about what the fan access is going to be like compared to IMSA, because he's never been to an FIA event before, and about doing some spectator photography.
Okay.
It's an awesome circuit to visit as a fan.
It is, and for photography it's pretty good as well. There's lots of places where you can get above the fence line, particularly thinking through the S's. The spectator banks there where you can see above the fences, I think, and see the cars going away from you.
I'm not sure how because it's been a while since I've been there, but if you can get up in the tower,
you can get up the tower.
Yeah, as a fan,
I think you can.
That is the vantage point up there with a camera is superb.
First things first. Come back to us on. I don't know which medium you used to communicate with us, but do come back to us if Stephen or I have got time. It's more likely, to be honest with you, that I've got some time. Let us know where you are. Let us know when you're there. You're in the paddock anyway. And amongst the access you will get, by the way, with your ticket, is there is a pit walk, usually an evening pit walk, if I remember correctly, at COTA. And there will be a autograph session. And the autograph session means every driver has to be there. So they're fabulous things to do. But reach out. If I've got time, I will show you a little bit behind the scenes, and I'm very happy to do it, is the straight and honest answer. Welcome, by the way, to the FI World Endurance Championship. I think you'll enjoy the show. It's different too. I'm not saying better or worse than. I love IMSA racing. I love the paddock atmosphere. Access is pretty good. It'll be the better because it's a flyaway race, and therefore no big trucks at the back of the garages. They'll be basically working out of containers, so the access into the paddock to the rear of the garages is going to be pretty good. The only advice I give you is in exactly the same ways I've seen fans behave in the IMSA paddock ad infinitum, is if you've got a question and someone's there that's not actively dealing with something that's red hot or rushing from place A to place B, ask the question respectfully. The vast majority of people who work in this sport are enthusiasts as well, and they will value the fact that you've got, a question to ask that they can answer. So show that respect for people's space and for people's working environment, but I think you should find that it's a happy place for a fan to come.
And as a circuit, away from fan access to the paddock, as a circuit to spectate at, it's superb. You should use every moment of that 6-hour race to try and get to as many vantage points as possible, because you will have access to the whole circuit and not just be thrown onto one grandstand that's open. It's usually very open. There's loads of spectator banks to walk around, and make use of all of them, because there are some awesome corners there where you can see the cars move around, and you can see some interesting battles through traffic. If you've never been there before and you haven't, you will be surprised at just how cool that place is to watch racing.
Remember, it's a long race, so don't by all means sit and watch the start, but then go and have a wander. Keep an eye on the weather. Make sure you've got the right gear to cover up with. Make sure you've got your sunscreen. Make sure you're carrying a chosen beverage. And find shelter from the sun as and when you can for a bit of a rest up. But do go and see the cars at speed out the circuit. There's nothing like it.
And make the most of the evenings in downtown Austin, because there's some amazing restaurants and bars to go to. If you love live music, there's always stuff on a weekend in Austin. And the food is spectacular. Your Tex-Mex food, your Mexican food is just as good as it gets.
Just tragic you're not going to experience any of that, really, because you'd be too busy working,
typing
faster.
Yeah. It's a shame, isn't it? Canary Alfitzi, Saint of Norfolk.
Alfisti
says, how far did or didn't the negotiations get between WEC and Silverstone for 2025, and how much work would MSV need to put in with Donington's pit area to be able to host WEC?
Okay, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Right.
He did say humour me.
Fine.
So there's the
Silverstone, reasonable way down the order. I think Silverstone have got a few lessons to learn at the moment in terms of the commercial offer. All I can tell you is this. Every time there is a conversation, often, by the way, not led by me, but led by my friends and colleagues at LMEM, they will always attempt to explain why Silverstone isn't there this year, looking back for the last 4 or 5 years.
There are hundreds of circuits in the world, and they were always one of the first. Anytime you mention the calendar to anyone LMEM,
I know
you're going to be asking about Silverstone.
And the answer is I'm not. Okay, so there is nobody responsible for calendar that is unaware that there is a fan base in the UK that would love us to come back to Silverstone. What do I think? I think that you may well find in the coming years that Silverstone is given an opportunity to prove itself as a venue operating at the level which the venues so far this season have operated, with the exception of Qatar, and that's very different. Okay, record crowds everywhere. My only advice is this: there are other opportunities to get international racing back to Silverstone. If and when that happens, I genuinely urge sports car fans that are keen to get the WEC back, please come. There is no better way of encouraging a racing organisation that has spotted the opportunity it's got with record crowds than to show they can do better. I'll give you a good example. It's from my previous career. I got involved back in my days at Transport for London in a number of things, one of which was trying to reduce the reliance that we had on the private car in central London. So do what you can with public transport. That's got its physical and its fiscal limitations, but also encourage people to walk and cycle. And one of the things we chose to do about encouraging people to cycle was to try to make cycling a bit more sexy. How do you do that? Well,
Lycra.
No. Actually, hell no. Okay. And in my case, absolutely hell no. But what you can do is, in the same way as we're here at the moment in the middle of the Olympics, and all sorts of people get all sorts of excitement from all sorts of elite sports that normally they wouldn't look at. Elite sports has a really brilliant way of motivating people to be interested in, how cool that tech is, how cool that lifestyle is. So what we did over a period of time was to persuade a motorsports organisation, the ASO, who run the Tour de France, that there was an audience in the UK, particularly in the southern counties of the UK, for elite cycling, so that we could bid for the opening of the Tour de France in London. And that involved us having to invest in what was then the milk race, or later the milk race, now the Tour of Britain, showing that an audience was being drawn into that and using those figures to show what was going to be possible. That worked. And we put, from memory, 1.3 million people on the streets of London and the southeast of England. That's a long way of saying there's no better way of persuading people to take an action you're interested in than showing by example. If and when Silverstone attracts a reasonably major international event that it's not currently got, please come, please bring your kids, and please bring friends. That is something you can do, you individually can do, that will be the best service to what it is that I know thousands of you want, which is to see the World Endurance Championship back at Silverstone. That's as much as I can say.
Joshua Johnson wants to talk about LMP2.
Go on, Josh.
We love LMP2 on this podcast. With LMP2 being basically a single make class now, and I know they'd like to see 4 chassis manufacturers in there, but it will inevitably surely go down the same route and be one manufacturer that gets it right and all the teams end up buying that chassis. I understand that they say that there'll be a version of BOP to equalise the 4 chassis, however, it seems like unnecessary brain damage. Would it not be better just to go down with one manufacturer and eliminate the reshuffling and ultimately added cost necessary to buy a new chassis after they bought the less successful one?
Right, I'm going to boost you up a bit here. I don't think there is currently a journalist in the world that has gone into as much depth as you have about LMP2, its present and its future. And even having done that and produced, frankly, what was a stellar piece from you on the options moving forward, we were still then surprised by what actually happened at Le Mans. So I'm not saying all bets are off, but it is a picture that at the moment is in a state of flux, correct?
Yeah, 100%. it's back to the drawing board with this rule set. And to answer your question about they'd like to have 4 chassis manufacturers, and yes, of course they would, because there are 4 manufacturers that are motivated to bring cars to this and that have already invested a load of money in next gen P2, and a lot of that money has gone down the drain, unfortunately, because the rule set's been scrapped since that delay.
To be clear, we're talking now about the spine of the LMDH cars from the 4 manufacturers, so Multimatic, Dallara, Ligier and Orica. Done. That's not happening.
Yeah.
Neither are we going to go forward.
Could be, but you don't have to anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Neither are we going down the road with the current 4.2 litre Gibson V8. So there's going to be a smaller, greener engine, we are told.
Yes.
So whether or not Gibson are successful in that tender, then there's some interesting politics around that, about the tender they had previously won, remains to be seen. I think they're in a very strong position. But lots of ups and downs in this. I think we're going to start to hear things quite quickly. But the key thing here...
I don't.
You don't?
No. There are working group meetings planned, but we're back to square one, and I think there's going to be plenty of discussions around the table before they're prepared to talk publicly about this again. I think it could be a while before.
You think there's any shockers to come? But bear in mind, there are 3 elements here. There's 3 elements here. Chassis, which is what absolutely consumes the debate about it. It's about chassis. Engine, we've just talked about. And tyres. And all 3 of those, because of the timeline that's just been, well, not parked, but, imploded, all 3 of those have got really searching questions and options ahead of them.
Do I think all 4 manufacturers will come back with a P2 car for next gen rule set? Yes. Would it shock me if one of them or 2 of them pulled out and used this as an option to say, do you know what, I'm not sure there's a business case for this anymore because there's not going to be enough cars to sell, and walked away? It wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
But I don't think right now there's an appetite for that. All 4 of them seem keen to carry on with it. They seem keen to build up this new rule set. The problem is right now is you've got like a tyre supplier like a Goodyear that was ready to go. You've got Gibson that was ready to go. You've got a couple of these manufacturers that were very, very nearly ready to go with their next gen car. And it's, can they use the work they've already done
in any way,
or do they have to literally scrap this and start again? And that's a conversation that's going to go on and on and on for months to come. Would it be easier to have one chassis manufacturer? Of course it would, and the teams, I think, in general, would like that because it eliminates the risk, takes BOP out of the discussion, and it means that, like we've got now, you've got a formula that's plug in and play. You get your car, and it's all about who can just produce the best lap times to extract the most performance, and get the best driver lineups in some of these championships. So yeah, the teams would like it, but you've got to respect the fact that these 4 manufacturers have put their heart and soul into this.
And their money.
And a big part of them signing up to LMDH in the first place was being able to get a P2 licence and the requirements surrounding that. So it's a challenging subject and a difficult debate, but I think we're going to end up before, ultimately. We just don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Okay. What's next? Apologies for the creaky chair, by the way.
Beastman 0916 says, as a broadcaster / journalist, how tough is it to stay motivated over several consecutive weekends of racing? This year's stretch seemed very tough with the N24, the Le Mans 24 Hours, IMSA at Watkins Glen, Spa 24 Hours, ELMS at Imola, and then work at Sao Paulo in a row with no breaks between them. Obviously, we're all here because we love the sport, and what you provide is amazing, but does the wider motorsport community help in any way with the level of fatigue?
It has been a pretty tough summer. You and I can remember 3-4 months ago looking at the big year planner on the wall of the office here and going, oh my God. And it was, I think, 8 consecutive weekends. But it's not just the fact that it's 8 consecutive weekends. It was the sort of weekends. You just named some of them. Le Mans is 2 weekends and the whole week in between. And it is impossible to overstate how grueling those weeks are. Nürburgring 24 with its own challenges. Spa 24 with its own challenges. And we took a pretty early decision that we were going to reduce our individual exposure to that. So Stephen this year did Nürburgring, I didn't. I did Spa, he didn't. I was initially going to go to Watkins Glen, I opted not to. So we sort of de-risked it. But even with that, and by the way, kudos to our Aussie correspondent, Michael Zalavari, who did all 3 of the 24-hour races this year and is still in recovery, by the way.
He seemed bright as a button the last time I saw him.
So on that front, it does have its impacts on you. I mean, I was chatting just this week to a friend and colleague of mine who works in Formula One, and their calendar is just nuts.
Easy money, isn't it? Formula One.
Yeah. Just absolutely nuts. And then you, Stephen, I think it was last week, said, was it last weekend was the first week off for NASCAR after a 21-week stretch?
Yeah, I think it's something like that. It's really worth reading, actually. Kelly Crandall from Racer.com, the NASCAR correspondent who goes to all these races and does an amazing job of reporting on it, wrote a column about this 10-day summer break they've got, or whatever it was, and just like how desperate everybody was for this couple of weeks to arrive, because NASCAR's another game, isn't it, when it comes to just the stretches of consecutive race weekends on the bounce. Let me put it into some context.
Many listeners to this podcast will know that I had a previous career, and I have never done a 9-to-5 job since age 18 to now age 60. Have never done a 9-to-5 job, and the vast majority of my time, until I stopped my office-based work in 2013-14, even if you're not in the office, you are on effective 24-hour call, and that might happen. It does happen, and it happens, most days and very many nights as well. So that has its challenges as well. Fatigue, absolutely. The travel schedule, pretty grueling. And you're not always able to travel well either. Economy seats is a difficulty. We had that with you coming back from Brazil. It's a long way to go when you're a tall guy with no leg room. I'm looking at you, Martin Haven, and that takes it out of you as well. And bear in mind that when we come back from those race meetings, Daily Sports Car is what it says on the tin. It's every day. You're there trying to produce meaningful news and feature content every day. So there's not a day off. It is a matter of trying to build in some resilience. And then there's the other factor. And I'm saying this, by the way, as a microcosm of what's very many people working for teams. There's a vast proportion of people who work in motorsport who are freelance. And what does that mean? It means they're working for more than one team in more than one championship. And there's one or two guys and girls that we see regularly in the paddocks of the world, whether it be WC, ELMS, GT World Challenge, that we'll see pretty much everywhere, that are good enough at their job and good enough in terms of their networking, that they're working multiple championships and are working, frankly, most weeks and most weekends. So the level of support you get from the people around you is a massive boost to that. Can't move on from that without mentioning two aspects. When it goes wrong, boy oh boy, are you grateful for having people of quality around you. It happened to me in Brazil, as you guys know, with me getting the awful news about our beloved Oscar having to be put to sleep as I left the plane, and Stephen will recall with horror just the effect that had on me. I was broken for 2 days, completely. So you need the people around you to be, people of quality and people of understanding and humanity, if you like. Most of all, though, so I'm here, the office at the bottom of the garden of my home. Couldn't do it without Trudy. I could not do it without Trudy. Would not do it without Trudy. You're the same with Carolyn.
Yep.
What you need is a strong, a partner around you that understands the challenges as well as the opportunities of the lifestyle that you lead. It does give us opportunities that other people don't get. We do go to places and have access that other people don't get. And sometimes you can help with friends and family with the odd experience that otherwise they wouldn't get. But they're the tiny minority of times. For the most part, it is simply, your wife, girlfriend, fiance, or opposite, recognising that when you're home, you're not in the best of shape. A number of times I will come home to, a cuddle from my wife as I come through the door, her saying, "Do you want to put the kettle on?" Me saying yes. The next thing I know is I've woken up 4 hours later on the couch with a cold cup of tea, and it's like that. We're about to get back to it at the end of this month, with yet more back-to-backness, and still probably more to be added to the melee, with a mix again of WC, ELMS, IMSA, some of the IGTC racing still to come, and one or two other events that it looks like we're likely to be on board for, whether or not that's for me with TV or for Stephen with DSC and Racer. So all sorts going on. I love what I do. I genuinely love what I do. But this has been a tough year in terms of the physical and mental demands.
A couple of calendar changes have made a massive difference.
Yeah.
The fact that Sebring is now not a WEC race, which means you've had the addition of the Prologue and Qatar as a new race, and then an additional race because Sebring's separate, has just made the first half of this year, just the way that it's shaken out with that calendar.
I mean, it's to be honest with you, it's the first year since I started working full time that I can remember making active choices not to go to races so that I could manage my own fatigue. It's the first time I can remember doing that. What my colleagues who cover NASCAR and Formula One must be suffering, I've absolutely no clue.
But the thing is, we've said this before, when you actually look at it, you go, it's only 8 WEC races, it's only 6 ELMS races. But once you add those two together, add in a few IMSA races, add in a few other 24-hour races, add in some tests,
add in prologues,
some trips abroad for launches, test days, you're up to 20 plus anyway.
We worked it out, I think. I mean, that generally speaking, I had a long conversation with, I'd say, a friend and colleague who works in Formula One broadcasting, and their travel schedule is, if anything, less challenging than ours. Because there's so much of it,
and because it's not just one long championship where they've factored in the way the schedules work in one long list. It's multiple championships working together, which means you'll be 1 week in Japan and then the next week in America and then the week after in Portugal. There's no structure to it. No. It's not like you're going gradually to different places on one time zone at a time. You could be, like we've got this year, just back to back, like fly away straight into a European round. It's brutal.
Completely get it. And it is that thing around trying to kind of manage expectation as well, because there's clashes to be managed. That there's things we can't do. We've had that a couple of times with me having to make choices with, do I do the Asian Le Mans series? There was the year where it didn't happen into Lagos, so they went to Kota. I missed that race because I was already committed to the Asian Le Mans series. That was 2 races organised by the same organisation. That's how crowded it now is. I'll finish with this bit, which is Spa 24
You've
hours.
got to enjoy it and have a laugh, because if not, you'd just be an easy cry.
You know what? For me, it would be so much more difficult if I wasn't working with people I didn't like. If I was working with people I didn't like, rather. To go and do the broadcasting we do with the WCTV team, with Martin Haven, with Ant Davidson, with Bruce Sharani now, and with Lou when Lou was with us, Dangerous Dave, our editor, and the rest of the crew, in the ELMS with Johnny and with Steph Wentworth, and with DSC, with you and the guys, and Dave Lord and Pedro. Boy, that makes it a lot easier, because you do get some time to decompress. It's a shared torture, if you like. But it's that. It is that thing around, you've got to love it. Frankly, if you didn't love it, there's an infinite number of ways you could earn more money for doing work at far less of a pace. But you've got to love it. And I think we've always tried to encourage the attitude with the crews that we have. We're there to make a positive contribution. We're there. Look, is it a business? Of course it's a business. It's how I earn my living. But for me, it's sort of pointless if you're not trying to push it forward in some way, to put in front of people an opportunity that you may have heard that might be of value to them. As we've done earlier in this show, if we've got somebody who's coming along and would value an experience that we can give them for 20 minutes of our time, why wouldn't you? But yes, it's grueling. It's fun. I know there's a lot of people out there that would love to do what you do and what I do. I think that would be fun for most people for maybe a couple of weekends, and then all of a sudden reality catches up.
Sean Broderick asks a question about WC. So after 5 races in the books, what are your views are the biggest surprises, performance-wise, good or bad, in Hypercar and GT3? What surprised us this year?
This.
Do you want me to start?
You go. Yeah.
If you'd have said to me after Le Mans and after Sao Paulo that Porsche would be leading both championships, I'd have been massively surprised.
I think that's spot on. For me, the biggest surprise has been the step forward made with the Porsche 963, with both, well, with all of them. With Hertz Team Jota, we've seen some real sparks of competitive spirit from Proton, but in particular from the Porsche Penske Motorsport crew. That looks like a different car. Completely different car this year. That's what testing, development, excellence can actually do. That for me was a big, big surprise. That's, I think, one of the major positives. I actually think we've now got 3 groups of cars in Hypercar. We've got the cars that are performing pretty close to their top level of performance. We've got an aspirant group. Let's talk about the likes of Alpine there that can show that pace at the top end, as can BMW, seemingly when Dries van Tour is at the wheel, but can't sustain it. But that shows the same kind of potential as Porsche then showed last year. And then you've got a couple, Peugeot and Isotta Fraschini, where they're looking to get to that peak of performance for a variety of reasons. I think that's a really healthy picture. The ones who are up against it, Alpine in terms of their viability over the longer runs, BMW about sustaining their pace, Peugeot are still trying to unlock the potential of that car, and Isotta.
Same with Lamborghini.
Lamborghini, apologies, I'm missing Lamborghini.
They're getting there.
But they are getting there, and I think we should see all of the above taking those steps more than gradually. That's the pleasant surprise, if you like. In the LMGT3, it's a little more hidden, but a little more profound. A pleasant surprise. If you'd have told me after Qatar that the United Autosports McLarens would be challenging for podiums by the middle of the year, I'd have laughed in your face. It looked lost. And yet, all of a sudden, that's beginning to come together. They've got a long way to go to challenge what looks like an utterly dominant Porsche effort.
It's just a freight train, isn't it?
It is indeed. That's the pleasant surprise in GT3. The nasty surprise in GT3 is we've got 9 manufacturers. If I'm right, and please check this, dear listener, I think 6 of those 9 have now scored a podium, at least one podium. And one of the ones that hasn't is Ferrari.
Yeah.
That, to me, is kind of borderline shocking.
Because the car is so good. The car is so good.
So that is beginning to show the quality of what's emerging in LMGT3. We are not there yet, okay? I think it does need still teams to learn, drivers to learn what is a significantly new formula for all of them. And we've got some new cars as well. I mean, would you have believed, for instance, from the first 4 or 5 races that the Ford Mustang GT3 made, that car would finish on the podium at Le Mans?
No. I mean, the Le Mans performance was shocking.
Yeah.
But in the best possible way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, when we're looking at things that surprise us, but not for good reasons, there was this momentum and sense behind the scenes at Peugeot that it's okay because the new version of the car's coming. It's okay. Don't worry about this. We've got a new car. It's okay. We'll be fine. We'll just get through this. And it's not working out the way they'd hoped just yet.
Yeah, I think that's the key issue. We have an inkling of what some of the problems might be there. I've said, I think, on this show before that if it is what I've been told it might well be, then it should be a reasonable fix with some development of the car. But it's possibly the 3rd or even 4th time I've said it, bit of hashtag wait and see. Anything you spotted? Good and bad?
The new Aston, I think, is just superb. I mean, it has been everywhere pretty much this race, but Heart of Racing looked really good, and they, unfortunate it wasn't that big incident at Le Mans that took the car out in the tricky conditions at Indianapolis. But had they had a good result at Le Mans, I think we'd be talking about them having a genuine chance in the final few races of the season to challenge the BMWs and the Porsches at the front. But I mean, I thought ahead of the season, Pure Racing, they're going to be good. Seen them in the Asian Le Mans, so spoken to them there. Was very impressed with the way they've gone racing the last year, but I didn't expect it to be like this.
Yeah.
I mean, with the car especially, the Porsche was a little bit of an unknown, really.
Well,
through much of last season because of the problems they had with the car when it was
2
originally
years ago.
developed.
This would have been inconceivable that car would be dominant in the way that it has. And they've had their bad luck and they've had their incidents, and we've had dramas for both of the Monty run cars, the EMA car and the Pure Racing car. But on pace, it just seems to have got it. And I think that whether or not that's the car, the team, the driver squad, all of the above, the reality is they could be difficult to catch at this stage.
And the Lexus as well, for instance, is another, I wouldn't say it's a massive surprise that they're not there fighting for podiums every week and winning races. But Akodis ASP are such a good team. Yeah. And I spoke to Jack Hawksworth about this at Le Mans, because he drove for Akodis at Le Mans on short notice, but he's a big part of the Vasser Sullivan effort in IMSA, which has just been ludicrously successful, winning championships and massive races with a car that's that old. And he's like, it's not a fair comparison really, because the way that the style of racing is in IMSA compared to WEC in terms of how you can build a lead in a race and the strategy that plays out is very different. And it's not an easy car to get your head around. And so it's just odd seeing a name like Akodis ASP not be right there. They're making big steps, but they're just not where I think they'd like to be at this
Fair
point.
enough. We're at 90 minutes, which is usually somewhere where we go.
It's a Marshall per hour.
Well, here's a Marshall per hour. Let's add a Graham Goodwin 10 minutes to it. Just pick out a couple more, I think.
We're almost there. We're almost there now. We'll go with there's only two more left anyway.
Fair enough.
So the randomist says, following the 1,006 kilometres of Palanga at the weekend, are there any other obscure races that either of you have fondness for, despite not having much significance or even great racing? We talked about this before we started recording, didn't we?
We did. Not a lot.
It's really difficult.
There's not a lot. I mean, I'm going to answer the question.
Entire Super Series.
I'm going to answer the question by not answering the question. Okay, and there is one event that I wish there was better coverage of. I wish there was better ways of following it online. I wish there was better broadcast coverage of. And the reason behind it is it's an iconic event. It's not a sports car race per se, and it ticks one of those boxes. We talked about it a little earlier when we were talking about the hydrogen matter of innovation and just doing crazy things with crazy technology and crazy looking cars. And some of them are garagistes. It's a bunch of people and their families and turning up with something that just looks bonkers and seeing whether or not it works. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And that's Pikes Peak. I've got a real fondness for Pikes Peak. And I think a lot of other people do too. But it's a bit folksy in the way that they've addressed following that event internationally. And I think that could do with a metaphoric kick in the pants. And I think they would find an audience for that if you put together a decent broadcast coverage with a decent broadcast, both imagery and in terms of the knowledge of the people talking about the racing.
It's a shame that the competitors have to do all the promotion for the event.
Yeah.
Because it's in this day and age where you've got like WRC Plus covering every stage all the way through with drones and onboard cameras and stuff like that. It's not a start-up event. It's got so much history and heritage. It amazes me that they haven't been able to get a stable broadcast for that.
No, it is. I don't know why. By all means, let me know if you know any of the politics involved in it. But that to me, it's an event that I've got some passion for that event. Beyond that, look, there's all sorts of championships. I'd love to watch a race here and love to watch a race there. There's not many of those quirky events left. Things like Thunderhill, that sort of had its glory days, I think. It seems to be on a bit of a wane at the moment, the Thunderhill 25 hours. There are a few of the historic racing events that I hanker kind of going to watch. I'll probably do those in my retirement in not too many years. But there's not very many standalone races that I can tell you that I'm thinking that's quirky and make me want to go and stand trackside. Probably the closest is one I did for the first time last year, and I have to say was never a favourite in terms of watching it from afar, but you get along to that event and it's a fundamentally different event, and that's the Macau Grand Prix. I went for the first time last year. It is utterly different from anything else I do. It's the shortest racing I've covered in the history of ever. But what a place! I mean, it is utterly unique. Still think, by the way, the GT3 cars are too big to be racing around there, but they should not lose a single ounce of the character of that event.
My only 10-10 isn't a standalone race, but it was something that I've had my head turned to this year, and that is the Mazda MX-5 Cup races at Daytona. Because I knew the Mazda MX-5 Cup was cool and the racing was great, but that circuit with the drafting and those cars, both races were absolute blockbuster, and it was the first time I'd ever properly watched them this year. It was epic.
Well, here's a teaser, okay? We will have some news, I hope, in the next week or two for Daily Sports Go, and I hope Racer as well, about the Mazda MX-5 Cup, the IMSA Cup. It is brilliant racing, you're absolutely right, but we will have some news of some significance, okay? And everybody involved with the Mazda MX-5 Cup who's listening to this is now going, what the hell's going on? Just watch this space. There's a couple of bits and pieces that we're putting together at the moment. I'm hoping to have a conversation in the early part of next week, and if we can do that, and it is all coming together as I think it will, then there's some significant news which will add a little bit of spice to those of you out there that I know do follow the MX-5 Cup, and will be all now screaming into your listening device going, what do you mean you only just discovered it? But you're right, it is a cracking part of the IMSA programme.
The final question comes from somebody whose username is Jota Save Us. Says, is there a scenario where the customer hypercar and GTP field fizzles out completely purely because of how many teams want to race? Could this even extend to some of the manufacturers not being able to flesh out their programs because there's no space for them to run grid-wise?
The answer is, I think it might come in phases. I think the inevitability is that we're going to see a bit of a contraction in the privateer field in WEC for next season. I think we might see a bit of an expansion of it in IMSA. I think quite possibly. But equally well, all good things will come to an end in terms of the level, the number of manufacturers involved in the WEC. And here's the point. If the growth in the WEC in terms of the people following it, forget for a moment the manufacturers, but just the interest it's engendering in the wider world, if that is maintained at something like the level we've got now or better, then it's a massive plus for a privateer with ambition and with sponsors behind them to get into something that's got that level of exposure. So the heady days of privateer hypercar might be a few years in the future yet.
Yeah, it almost feels like a redundant question to ask heads of manufacturers now. There was a point about a year ago where it was, every time you got the opportunity to speak with senior management in these manufacturers, when are you going to do privateer hypercar? You're looking at customer cars. How's it going to work? It actually looks like a ridiculous question now, because unless you want to race an IMSA, and it would be possible if you want to race an IMSA, getting a privateer hypercar on the grid in where it's going to be incredibly difficult. And so it's almost like, it's Porsche or bust, really, because all the other manufacturers, although they're looking at it, and some of them do have ambition to be in that field, it's going to be a lot of money to spend on something that you might put a lot of effort into something and get one car out of it or nothing at all. You're not going to make money. Well,
I mean, Isotta could be an interesting one moving forward. Let's see what comes out of that, the machinations there, and hopefully they will put together a deal with two factory cars. But if not, if they do decide to sell a car to a privateer and there's someone willing to buy one, that can be a manufacturer entry, even though it's a privately entered car. There's all sorts of bits and pieces. I'd say this much. Would I like to see a healthy privateer marketplace? I really, really would. It's the basis of my enthusiasm for sports car races are the people involved, the racing people involved in it, not just the big corporate entities. But I think we can afford to be patient. And I think if we had to wait a year or 2 years to see some green shoots emerging there, for whatever reason, that is most likely to come if we've got a healthy basis for this sport. And at the moment, it looks very healthy. Healthy enough that we don't really have to worry immediately about whether or not we can sustain all of the factory interest we've currently got. I think if we didn't, there are 5 or 6 plans to fill the gap if a 2-car factory team dropped out. That's with other factories wanting to come. It's with the potential for growth of hypercar. It's with the growth of LMGT3, because there are clearly manufacturers that would like to come that currently can't. From everything we hear, there may well be additional growth in GT3 to come. And we'll have a little bit more to say about that on DSC in the coming weeks. So I think we can afford at this point not to be too glum about it, not to worry about it, but to see it as an opportunity. And if you want to see what that looks like, go and have a look at the grids of the World Sports Car Championship in the early 80s with the birth of Group C, and watch what happened over a period of 3 or 4 years, particularly with Porsche, where we saw some manufacturers come in and leave, and what replaced them were privateer Porsches. And I think that could be something that we see in a couple of years' time, that maybe with a little bit of contraction here, or the fact that we might get to the stage where they decide that numbers are king, and maybe we look at tracks for some or if not all of the races that can fit an even bigger grid in the future, that maybe that's the point at which the trigger is pulled by people, and those programs start to come to the fore. We already had the position explained by Pierre Fillon, that he wants to look at the Asia Le Mans series to see whether or not there might be an Asian market. I think that's a stretch, I'll be honest with you. Doesn't want that for the European Le Mans series. But I think we're going to be starting to ask questions of ourselves as a sport. What is the future in terms of the way that our racing is structured? And the big question that occurs to me right now, Stephen, is have we got a structure of racing and sports car racing that is appropriate for the level of demand that is out there, bearing in mind there are so few places you can race certain cars? LMP2 is a great example of it. I'll pick up with the point I was about to make in the previous question. Just after he announced the massive calendar for SRO at Spa 24 Hours, I had a quick moment with Stefan Mattel and said to him, do you sometimes hanker after the days when your calendar announcement at the end of the year was 8 rounds of the FIGT Championship? Now we've got GT World Challenge, on pretty much every continent bar Antarctica, plus IGTC and national championships for GT3 and GT4, and in some cases for touring cars as well. And I think you're now at the stage where certain marketplaces are saturated. What do you do next? Do you try to play with the structure you've got? Do you try to add in an opportunity for LMP3 somewhere else, LMP2 somewhere else, LMGT3 somewhere else? And the same questions apply to IMSA. You said it yourself, with an overspill of, 20 cars?
20.
20 cars? What kind of... And let's presume for a moment that a reasonable number of those 20 cars are not cars that just want to do Daytona. How much of a business case do you need it to have that let's assume that 10 of those cars would have to be turned away completely, okay? How much are they prepared to pay for a platform to present those cars in national, regional competition? What kind of opportunity do you need to prepare, whether or not you are IMSA, SRO, USA or elsewhere, or LMEM and the ACO, to find an opportunity to put something together that will be attractive enough for people to put down those 6 and 7 figure sums to get those cars racing? I think we're at that point now.
Yeah. Food for thought, isn't it?
It is. I think that's it, my friend.
That is.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for the questions you've put forward for this belated listener question-led edition of the Week in Sports Cars. Marshall Pruitt, I know, will want to be back next week. We'll try and do another question-led effort before we start to go travelling again in a couple of weeks' time. For now, I want to say thank you to our continued backers for Twisk, to Pfaff Technologies, to the Justice Brothers, and to TorontoMotorsports.com. I have been Graham Goodwin. He's still Stephen Kilbey.
Sorry, guys.
So, and producing this show back in the United States is, of course, Marshall Pruitt. We'll be back with you next week.